Ms. Battle, good morning and welcome. If you'll come forward, please, to be sworn wherever you're comfortable. If you'll face me and raise your right hand to be sworn. Thank you. Do you swear or affirm any testimony you give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Okay.
All right, thank you. You can put your hand down. If you'll follow the bailiff around to the ramp that leads up to the witness chair, please watch your step. When you get to the chair, go ahead and have a seat. Make yourself comfortable. That microphone does adjust. Mr. Chair, you may proceed.
Thank you. Good morning. If you could please tell the jury your name and spell your last name for the court reporter.
Okay, my name is Mariel Battle, Mariel, and Battle Battle.
Okay. And where do you currently live, Ms. Battle?
Right now I'm living in Jacksonville, Florida.
And who do you live with in Jacksonville?
My parents and my sister.
Okay. And what are you currently doing now?
Currently right now I'm looking for an internship for the fall semester so I can graduate from FSU.
Okay, so are you still currently at Florida State University?
Yes, I'm currently enrolled.
Okay. Back in August of 2015, how old were you back then?
18.
Right. And what were you doing around August of 2015?
I was basically moving into FSU, and I was in overflow housing at the time.
So were you coming from Jacksonville?
Yes.
So have you lived in Jacksonville your whole life?
Yes.
Okay. And so what year were you entering?
My freshman year.
And you mentioned overflow housing. Tell the jury what overflow housing is.
So pretty much when I got in, I decided to go to FSU kind of late, and then they kind of put you in a lottery system if you're late and trying to get on campus housing. And so at the time, they didn't have a place for me to stay, but they did put me in overflow housing, which they kind of make like a makeshift room in one of their common rooms or study rooms in their residence halls. And at the time, I was in Smith Hall.
Okay, so you were in Smith Hall that time.
Yes.
And when you say they make a makeshift room in a study hall or study room, so they bring in beds, I'm assuming?
Yes, bunk beds.
Okay. How many people generally are in an overflow room?
They had about 2 sets of bunk beds, so I'm assuming probably for 4 people.
Okay. Do you recall the date you arrived at FSU to move in that freshman year?
I'm sorry, repeat that.
Do you recall the date you arrived at Florida State to move in?
It was Wednesday, August 19th.
Okay, Wednesday, August 19th.
Mm-hmm.
And did your parents come with you to help you move in?
Yes, my parents and my sister.
Okay. And where did you go when you got there on that Wednesday, off of 19th? Great.
They said to report to Smith Hall, so I went to like their lounge area to go and check in and tell them like, hey, I'm here, and they give you like the key and like their room report room, so that way it tells you like what's in the room, if there are any damages or something like that. And yeah, so you check in there and then you go upstairs to your room.
Okay. Do you recall on that Wednesday about when you got there? Was it morning, afternoon, evening?
I'm not 100% sure. I would say maybe around noon.
Okay. And did you start moving stuff into your overflow room?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Do you recall what room number it was?
I believe it was room 601.
When you moved into that room, was anyone else in that room?
I could see that there was another girl that was already living there, but she wasn't there at the time.
Okay. So that night, did you ever meet the other person who was living in that room?
Yes, I did.
Okay. What was her name?
Petra Henry.
And now these rooms that are overflow rooms, they're not intended for you, I guess, to live there the entire semester.
No.
There's just kind of to keep you there until they can move you into a permanent room.
Correct.
All right. And so both you and Petra were in the same situation, just staying in that room?
Yes.
All right. So that first night that you stayed there, that Wednesday night, who all was in that room with you that stayed there that night?
It was just me and Petra.
Okay. So how about the next day, on Thursday? What did you do that Thursday?
Probably just after trying to set up everything, make sure I got everything, and I was hanging out with my parents and my sister to kind of like go and get little things that maybe we've forgotten for the move, and get me food as well that same day.
Okay. Now on Thursday night, did you stay back in that room again?
Yes, I did.
All right. And who all was with you that Thursday night? Who all stayed there?
Just me and Petra again. At that time, my parents left that Thursday.
So your parents had they left on that Thursday.
The Thursday night, yes.
And when you went to bed that night, it was just you and Petra.
Yes.
All right. The next morning, did anyone else move into that room?
Yes.
And this is Friday morning?
Yes.
Who was that person who moved in?
Nicole Nachtman.
Do you see her in the room here today?
I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't know where to.
It's okay. I'm just asking you if you see her. If you don't,
No, currently I do not see her.
all right.
Oh, I see her right there. Sorry.
Okay, where is she? What is she wearing? And what is she?
She's wearing a blue sweater with a white button-down top.
All right. Record reflects she's identified the defendant, Judge.
The record shall so reflect.
And the first time you saw Miss Nachtman was that Friday morning.
Yes.
And how did the conversation go? Would you recall what time she was moving in?
Maybe 9 or 10, somewhere around there, because I was eating breakfast. So it was in the morning because I had somewhere to be afterwards.
Was Petra in there with you when you saw her?
No.
Right. And when Nicole Nachtman moved in, did she talk to you at all?
Yeah, she just introduced herself and what class she was in and stuff like that.
Right. Did she say anything else to you? What class did she say she was in?
I know she was an upperclassman. I'm not exactly sure if she was a junior or a senior at the time.
And what else?
And I guess I was like asking her, oh, do you have anybody there to help you? And she said her dad was downstairs to help her because I was concerned because she looked like she had a lot in her hand.
Okay. And so anything else that you can remember of the conversation that morning that y'all had?
Not at that time because she was in and out trying to bring her stuff in, and then later on, because I had to leave and go and meet with there was like a life coach meeting that I had to go to, and then I came back and spoke to her a little bit then.
Okay, so you left for a while, and what do you recall about what time you came back?
Probably around the afternoon. I can't remember if it was, because there was something else in another conversation that we had, but I can't remember if it was like the afternoon after I had went somewhere or beforehand, but I do know she had said that she wanted me to say that she had moved in the day before.
Okay, did she tell you who she wanted you to say that to?
I guess if anyone asked.
All right. Did you find that strange?
I did. I didn't see anybody asking me like that type of question, so I didn't think it was that important.
All right. Specifically, she said that if anyone asked you, she was moved in the day before. Is that what you said?
Yes.
All right. So when you talked to her later in the afternoon, do you recall anything else she said?
No, because a lot of the times that we interacted, I was on my laptop and she was doing her own thing as well. Nothing.
Did there come a time where she ever mentioned anything about her mom?
She did eventually, because like I said, she was kind of going back and forth and out of the room. She said to me that her mom was like recently in like a car accident of some sort. I'm not exactly sure where it happened, but I assumed that it was like in her hometown, Tampa.
Okay. And you knew she was from Tampa at that point?
Yes.
Right. Anything else you can recall her telling you that specifically stands out in your mind?
I know she said that, I don't know if she was on the phone with like a PI or private investigator, but that's about all I remember her saying, that she was like in conversation with a PI. I don't know if they're investigating like the car accident or something else. I'm not exactly sure.
All right. How did she seem that time? Did she seem nervous, excited, happy, sad? Any particular emotion that you noticed?
She seemed rather normal. I mean, maybe like, because she was sweating, maybe she was nervous or something of the sort, but she did seem rather like, okay, she wasn't sad or happy or anything like that.
Okay. Were you and Petra ever in the same room together with her?
No, we were never in the same room together. It was always back and forth. We weren't all three in the same room at the same time.
And did Petra get out of the overflow housing that morning or sometime while you were there?
So that was Friday. I think she told me that she had been assigned, I believe it was McCollum Hall that Thursday night, and she said that she was going to be moving out on Friday.
So eventually, what happened after all this time with Nicole? Did anything else happen that day?
I do know, I think I went outside briefly to maybe be on the phone or to talk to someone, but I did notice her. There's like a building in behind Smith Hall. There's these two buildings, and there's like this little walkway. And I do remember her kind of like walking fast or like running across. I wasn't exactly sure what she was doing.
Okay. Did there come a time where the police ever showed up?
Yes. I'm sure when I went back to my room, and this was after, like, Nicole wasn't back in the room at that time when I went back in. I noticed that there was police outside of my room.
Okay. And did they let you back into your room?
At that time, they did. One of the police officers, eventually, I think after, like, maybe 30 minutes passed of them being outside the room, one of them came in, and he asked if he could stand inside with me. And I was like, sure, okay. So they came in and stood there for a bit, and then eventually they asked if I could
hearsay.
I'll caution the witness not to testify to what someone else said.
Okay, I'm sorry.
But eventually, did you have to leave the room?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Did you identify to the law enforcement officers what property was yours?
No.
Okay. And how long do you think you were out of the room that you had to get out of the room?
I talked to the police maybe for like, I was probably at the police station for an hour or something like that. And then they brought me in a squad car back to Smith Hall, and I tried to go back into my room, but they said that I couldn't go in my room. It was blocked off. And then from that point on, I didn't go back into my room for another 8 hours.
So you actually went down to the police station that day?
Yes.
And you gave a statement?
Yes.
All right. And in that statement, did you let the police know what Nicole had told you?
Yes, I did.
Just want to have 1 second?
Absolutely.
I'll pass it, please.
Cross-examination?
Yes, sir. Morning, Ms. Battle.
Morning.
So you, back in August of 2015, were an incoming freshman.
Correct.
And you had indicated the reason you had gotten this overflow housing was because you had registered late.
Yes.
So this overflow housing is typically for either students who missed the deadline for housing, maybe forget to register for housing, and they put you in this overflow until there's a permanent spot available for you.
I guess I'll explain a little more. It's more like you accept your offer to go to that university, like Florida State, and then at that point you say like, oh, I want to live on campus housing, and then I guess because it depends, it's like a totem pole. So if say you're like 800 and something, then you might be like at the bottom and they don't have enough space for you at the current time, and then they put you in overflow housing until, say, like a student decides they don't want to come to FSU, they might put you in that room.
Another reason, though, you could get into overflow housing is if you're, for some reason, late or missed the deadline and now there's no housing available. Let's say you're an upperclassman.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true?
I'm not 100% sure because I was a freshman at the time, but...
You didn't learn that later on as you moved through the system?
No, I didn't.
Now, you indicated your parents were there to move you in.
Correct, my parents and my sister.
That's typically common for college students. I'm assuming your parents help you kind of get your stuff in, get you situated, get you the things you need.
Correct.
In fact, your parents actually spent the night somewhere in Tallahassee that Wednesday night and then left on Thursday to make sure you were settled.
Correct.
Now, the overflow space you were assigned was called Smith Hall.
Correct.
And you described it as this lounge area where they just put in a couple sets of bunk beds, maybe a dresser, until the permanent housing becomes available.
Correct.
Now, your first, I guess, overflow roommate you met was Petra.
Correct.
And you met her on Wednesday.
Correct.
And then at some point you said on Thursdays when she gets word that her real housing or permanent housing is available, so she was going to be moving out on that Friday morning.
Correct.
You didn't see Miss Nachtman until Friday morning. That was your first time laying eyes on her.
Yes.
Your first impression of Miss Nachtman was that she appeared kind of weird to you. Dressed weird?
It wasn't what I would typically wear, or that I was, because that was 2015. It's not typically what I would see people wearing, but that might have just been her
Her style?
Yes, correct.
But different. Would that be
Yes.
fair to say? She was by herself, no one with her when you first met her.
Correct.
And you didn't really have much interaction with her when you initially meet her.
No, just the basic conversation of introducing yourself.
You indicated earlier you stayed on your side of the room and you were on your laptop.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a yes?
Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
And then she was on, I guess there's a couch in the lounge doing her thing.
Yes.
Now, at some point after meeting her, you see her on the phone as if Miss Nachtman's receiving phone calls on her cell phone. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And after one of those phone calls that she's having is when she tells you that her mom was in an accident or some
Correct.
type of car accident.
Correct.
This didn't just come out of the blue. It was after you had already seen her on the phone talking to somebody.
Yes.
And you obviously have no idea who she was speaking to.
No.
Now, at some point, you see police officers outside. Correct?
Yes.
But you never saw Miss Nachtman's reaction to the police there or anything like that.
No, she was not in the room.
And then you never saw her again.
No.
Your entire interaction with Miss Nachtman, fair to say, maybe a couple of hours.
Correct.
Now, when you get to Smith Hall that day, even though it's just overflow, I'm assuming there's somebody checking people in. Is that right?
Correct.
So they must have a list, or there's people from housing there. You know, Mariel Battle's here, and they check you in, and they give you your room assignment.
It's typically the residence assistants that are working, trying to check people in, and there's also probably like a resident coordinator walking around just to make sure everything's going smoothly.
And when you check in, do they check in, okay, you checked in on Wednesday, I have you checked in at, this particular date. Have you fill out forms, things like that. Do you remember any of that in the check-in process?
Yes, we did fill out forms.
Okay. So when Miss Nachtman told you that she wanted, if anyone asked, to tell them I've been here since yesterday, that would have seemed kind of odd, taking into account there's actually somebody downstairs checking you in when you really get there.
Correct.
And I'm assuming they asked for maybe your student ID to verify who you are.
Correct.
And have you fill out forms. So that it's a very specific check-in process as to when someone arrives and who in fact they are.
Correct.
And then do you all at that point have, I guess, like your IDs or swipe cards to get in and out of the dorm?
Yes, the FSU ID.
Okay. So that's another method or way to kind of monitor who's coming in and out and when, if somebody needed to determine that. Isn't that right?
Correct.
I can have a moment?
Yes.
I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Redirect.
No redirect, Your Honor.
May this witness be excused by the state
Yes, you may.
and by the defense?
Yes.
All right, thank you, ma'am. You may step down. You may be excused as a witness at this time.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, as I indicated before we called that witness, we'd be taking our lunch break after that witness, so we're going to take our lunch break now. It's a little early, but you're also getting out of here early today since we're not going until 5 or 5:30. I said I was going to give you an hour, but it's 11:22, so I'm just going to round up and give you till 12:30, so it's a little more than an hour. So I expect you back at 12:30. We'll pick up at that point. Please do not discuss the case amongst yourselves or with anyone else. Please do not do any research related to the case, and please avoid any exposure to this case outside of the courtroom. All rise for the jury. Jury has exited. Everyone may be seated. All right, we're not going to lunch. We're going to proceed with this issue of violation of the rule of sequestration. First, I think that we can all agree, let me know if we can't, but that apparently the next three witnesses have been watching the trial on live stream and also discussing their testimony amongst themselves outside of the courtroom is the information that I have. Is that a correct assessment?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Terry, would you agree?
Judge, that's what I've been told. I mean,
Well, I thought you had the opportunity to talk to them.
No, I didn't ask any questions, Judge. That's what I went out there and just said.
You went and instructed them.
I went and instructed them about the rule of sequestration. I said,
Okay.
and the judge is going to want to talk to you individually
Okay.
about what you all may have talked about.
Okay.
That's all I said to them.
All right, well, and then we're going to get to the next stage of calling them in and talking to them. I have some case law that I have been reviewing and have provided to both the state and the defense. I just want to ask before we get started, just so I know the parameters of my inquiry with the witnesses, is the defense in any way at this point contending that the violation was intentional or made in bad faith? Because that's one of the inquiries concerning the case law that I should do. And
was it an intentional violation by the witnesses to violate the rule?
well, first let me say I am not accusing the witnesses. When they come in here, I'm going to tell them that no one's suggesting they did anything wrong, because I think the state has admitted, and I'll go back and make sure, that they were not instructed on the violation of the rule.
I had not instructed these three particular witnesses. They were the ones flying in, and I just, again, Judge, my fault. I did inadvertently forgot them as far as they were traveling, and we were in here. And it just,
Well,
And
I'm
again-
not going to get into that.
and again, going back to the live streaming, I did not realize until yesterday that the live streaming went beyond this courthouse. So I didn't realize you could actually get online. So I never even
But
thought.
whether they had exposure outside of the courtroom doesn't have anything to do with any of that, why they might have had it. So if they say that they did have exposure, then that's a violation of the rule, whether it's their intent or anyone else's intent. Because I know now that they weren't told, that was not, it cannot be attributed to them as their intent. So what I'm asking is whether the failure, I guess, to advise them of the invocation of the rule by the state is in any way done intentionally or in bad faith.
Okay, and the reason that I said it the way I did was I wanted to make sure that you were asking me, was the violation by these witnesses intentional? And if that's the question, the answer is no, because they were not advised of the rule. If you're asking me if it was done in bad faith, again, if we're talking about the witnesses, they were not advised of the rule, so they could not have done that in bad faith.
No, that's the easy part.
That's
But
the
the
easy-
inquiry is also, it says the witnesses, the attorneys, or a party. So we have to focus on the state right now. Is it your assertion in any way that the state failed to advise them of the rule intentionally or in bad faith? Do you have any evidence or any reason to suspect that it was done intentionally or in bad faith?
Judge, do I believe that there are seasoned attorneys that are trying this case in this courtroom that know what the rule of sequestration is and understand the obligations that we as lawyers have, and that do I believe that it was negligent on the part of the state of Florida to not advise the witnesses that of the rule of sequestration? The answer to that would be yes, I do think that that's happened. Now, if you're asking
Well,
me
but
to
negligent and
infer-
inadvertent are quite the same. Intentional and bad faith is the other side of that.
Judge, what I'm going to say is, obviously, there are two attorneys in this courtroom trying this case. Neither one of them undertook their responsibility to advise the witnesses, and that those facts speak for themselves. And
Well, but you would agree with me that an attorney could do that intentionally. I don't want to advise them of the rule because I want them to be able to be influenced by the, or they could just because they're tied up or for whatever, whether it even be a poor excuse, an excuse that they didn't advise them of the rule, but that's inadvertent. I mean, there's a difference.
you know what? At this point, maybe I'm not in a position to answer that.
Okay.
Because if for some reason I discover that in the last 2, 3, 4 days they've talked to their witnesses and they didn't advise them of something that's gone on, I don't know enough about this to sit there. I've known Mr. Terry for as long as I've known the courthouse. So I mean, I
Neither
think
one
I
of you
have to
look
wait.
as old as this courthouse.
We're both as old as this courthouse, Carol. But I think it's important to have the witnesses come in and testify as to these, because I don't know what
Well,
contact
see,
people did have.
and now you gave me another question to ask them, whether or not they've had any contact with anybody from the state attorney's office over the past couple of days. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate that this inquiry, because that has added that, because that may factor in then to my ultimate determination, because pursuant to the Supreme Court of Florida, that's one of the questions that I have to answer, whether it was inadvertent or whether it was intentional and was done in bad faith. So I appreciate that. That's another question I'm going to ask. Now, are you aware of the case law, though, that says that the intent of the rule, it's not a strict rule of law. The Supreme Court has said it is not a strict rule of law. That the intent of the rule is intended to prevent a witness's testimony from being influenced by the testimony of other witnesses in the proceeding. And the Supreme Court has expressly stated that the rule must not be enforced in such a manner that it produces injustice. Before the court excludes testimony on the ground that the sequestration rule was violated, the court must determine that the witness's testimony was affected by other witnesses' testimony to the extent that it substantially differed from what it would have been had the witness not heard the testimony. So my next question is, were these witnesses who are about to testify, were they deposed under oath?
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
And
Go ahead.
so in my mind, having read the two cases that you provided, and I've got someone doing a little bit of additional research just in case, in my mind, it's not only you making the inquiry about what they've been exposed to or not been exposed to, what did they talk about or not talk about, who from the state attorney's office has been in contact with them and when, because whether it's Mr. Terry, Ms. Derry, whether it be Ms. Blevins, whether it be some other assistant, have they had any contact with anyone? Because if you recall, towards the end of yesterday, when Detective Thomas was on the stand, and I made an objection because I didn't know where the lake discussion was going to go, at that time we took a break so that Mr. Terry could remind his witness of a suppression issue that had occurred so that we wouldn't have an error made, and he had not talked to Mr. Thomas about that, as I recall. Mr. Terry can certainly correct me. So not only would you have to do those inquiries, but basically now Mr. Terry or Ms. Derry will have to me, proffer the testimony and or place the testimony in front of you. You'll have to have a cross by Ms. Hersey. We'll have to see whether they're going to substantially change their testimony in any way so that you can make that inquiry. And I would suggest to you that I also would like to know if they were listening to the opening statements, because that can also impact how they might be now tailoring. So I don't know whether we're going to get to the point where I can tell you without listening to the testimony, is it appropriate to exclude that testimony, because I don't know if they're going to substantially change it or be influenced.
But based on the case law that we're all aware of, if these witnesses march in here in front of this jury and testify identical, consistent with their former testimony at deposition,
We're good.
There's no issue.
If they do differently, then the jury will have heard them. We'll have to exclude them. We'll have to move for a mistrial. I would suggest in abundance of caution, considering we've been here for 5 days and I know how much all of us have expended, that we should not run that risk, depending on what they say to you when they come in here. I think we may find ourselves not only talking to them about the violation of the rule, but also how their testimony might be affected by that.
Judge, if I could interject here. These three witnesses, it might help your honor if you know what these three witnesses are going to testify to. And I think when you hear that, you'll realize the likelihood of them being affected by anything is so remote, it's hard to even express. Petra Henry, who would have been our next witness, is merely going to testify to when Nicole Nachtman arrived. The first time she saw her was Friday morning. We've already heard that from Mariel Battle. That's all she's going to testify to, and the fact that she said that her mom had passed.
So what's the need? Why isn't that cumulative?
That's fine, Judge. If they want to,
she's out.
We won't call her.
She's out.
No, wait, excuse me.
Whoa, you want her to testify now.
Well, Judge, there's additional things that we expect her to say, and if she comes in and says something different, those aren't going to be my only questions.
No, I'm in an abundance of caution excluding her.
No, why should the defense...
So now you want her to testify?
Why should the defense be prejudiced by what this... This is your witness, so feel free to...
Oh, so wait a minute. You're raising this issue of a violation of the rule, and I'm saying I'm not going to let her testify because what they want her for is cumulative. If you want her to testify, that's a different issue.
I don't want her to testify if when I ask her these questions she's been colored because of the rule of sequestration. The issue doesn't change.
Is she your witness?
She's cross-subpoenaed.
She's listed as a defense witness as well.
Judge, she's cross-subpoenaed, and if she changes what we anticipate she's testified to under oath based on her view, then yes, we're going to have an issue and want her excluded. We don't know. You're asking us questions that, hypotheticals, we don't know what these witnesses are going to come in and say if they've been affected, if they haven't, and if they've changed. But yes, she made observations of Nicole Nachtman that morning that I intended to ask her about. So Mr. Terry, just wanting to know if she was there on Friday isn't the only question that Ms. Henry would be asked.
Well,
that's a cross-examination. That's a cross-examination. If I don't allow them to call her because they didn't inform her of the rule, and they don't get to get in that cumulative testimony about when she arrived, then you remain able to call her. She's on your list. She's cross-subpoenaed. Then you can call her in your case in chief, and then we'll readdress whether or not I should exclude her because of a violation of the rule. And it's not your fault, so no, I wouldn't exclude her. You would be entitled to call her.
Okay.
Okay.
She's out. That's easy. She's not testifying for the state.
The other two witnesses, Judge, are more ministerial than anything else. They're just going to basically testify to paperwork, quite actually, that the defense has already put into evidence in the motion that we had earlier. And it's just paperwork. That's it, literally. One of the witnesses, Jessica Gilbert, is just going to talk about communications that are already going to be put in through the telephone records. So that's basically all she's going to testify to. And Christina Chiotti is the woman who just checked her in. And all she's going to say is, yeah, I checked her in, she came in, I gave her her key, and she went upstairs. How those two particular witnesses could possibly be affected by anything that was said previously in this trial is hard to imagine. Because their testimony is so limited to just those two particular issues. They never had any contact with Nicole Nachtman. They never had any contact with anything to do with this case other than to say, yeah, I texted her or we emailed back and forth. I told her about the housing situation. She sent me she put in the money, and I let her know she had housing. Christina Chiotti, all she did was check her in that morning. So how these two witnesses could in any way be affected by anything, including my opening, I couldn't even imagine, Your Honor. They're very small parts of this big, huge trial. And so their testimony is just limited to just getting this information in. And the information's not going to change. Those texts and those emails back and forth between Jennifer Gilbert or Jessica Gilbert and the defendant are going to be the same. That can't be changed. Christina Chiotti, the time she checked her in, that's going to be the same. That can't change. There's nothing from these two witnesses that can in any way change what their testimony is, because the testimony is limited to those issues. So, Judge, I would ask that they be inquired. You can inquire of them, and if you can find out or see how their testimony could change, then that's fine. It can be excluded, but it's very ministerial. They're part of this in this whole thing. So I would suggest we just bring them in now, Judge.
The defense would ask that the three individuals, well, you're going to exclude. I would still suggest that for purposes of this record, that we should have an inquiry as to the three witnesses as to what was being discussed out there. That's what we would ask you to do at this time. He's absolutely right about what the two individuals are going to do with regards to the housing and emails or whatever those paperwork documents are. We believe for preservation of the record that we should make the inquiry, and we're comfortable with the court making the inquiry and allowing us to ask questions if necessary.
All right. Let's bring in, and because the one had conversation that I indicated I would exclude with the others, I'll inquire with her just so there's any, in case there's any inconsistencies that she suggests that they discuss something that the others don't. So we'll bring them in one at a time. What's their names?
Petra Henry.
Petra Henry. I'm just going to put them at the podium there. I'm not going to put them on the stand. Again, I'm going to tell them that they haven't done anything wrong. Okay, hold on. We have a witness present. Ms. Henry, good morning or afternoon and welcome. It's still morning. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning.
First, let me tell you that no one has suggested in any way that you did anything wrong, and I apologize for having to bring you in under these circumstances. But an issue has come up that necessitates me to inquire with you about a couple of issues. The first thing that I need to do is swear you in if you'll raise your right hand, please. Do you swear any testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
All right, thank you, Ms. Henry. You can put your hand down. First of all, it's come to our attention that some of the next witnesses may have had some exposure to this trial outside of this courtroom. Do you fall into that category?
I don't see how I would, no.
Okay, well, what we heard is that someone may have watched the live stream of this trial. Have you had an opportunity to watch, or have you watched anything regarding this trial on live stream?
No, I've not.
Okay. The other issue of that is whether witnesses have discussed their testimony that they intend to give in here outside of this courtroom with other witnesses. Have you done that?
I have not.
Okay. Well, open it up to, I'm going to open it up to questions from, you've answered the questions that I was concerned about. I'm going to allow both the state and the defense to ask you any questions. Mr. Terry?
I have no questions, Judge.
This is Miss Henry.
This is Miss Henry.
Miss Henry, I just have a few. Was there any discussion out in the lobby with, I guess, you and some of the other witnesses just about that you had given depositions in this case and you know?
We talked about how it was 2 years later and that was it, and we just discussed the round table in the room. There was nothing about the case at all.
That it had been 2 years, was there any discussion about like depositions or that how long it had been since you all had given depositions?
Not really, no. We mostly just talked about what we were doing now and where we lived and the weather, and just kind of small talk.
And who was present for the conversation, if you remember? Like, who were the other people you were talking to?
Outside,
Yes.
Jessica and I forget the other girl's name.
Okay. No, that's okay. I have some questions that you've previously testified to under oath in a deposition, and I just want to make sure that these would still be your answers if I asked them.
Okay.
Do you recall when Ms. Nachtman, when you first came in, and I'm talking about the lounge area, because you were there in that overflow housing in Smith Hall, right?
Correct.
And do you recall her sitting on her top bunk with a blanket around her when she first got there?
I do.
And that she had basically no sheets on her bed?
She had no sheets on her bed.
That she was upset and it looked like she had been crying?
She was crying or sniffling. I remember that very.
And you also saw her mumbling, but it was nothing you could really make out?
Well, I read my initial statement to the police that was right after, and I remember it said that she was on her phone, so she might have just been reading something that's, I don't know.
Do you recall if it was mumbling or just nothing you could make out?
Nothing that I could make out, and I was trying to just pack up my stuff and leave. I wasn't really paying much attention to.
Your overall impression of her was she was tired and kind of disheveled?
Very much so, yes.
Poor hygiene, just looked like a mess.
Yes.
You introduced yourself and asked her what was wrong,
I did.
and she told you her mother had died.
Correct.
Judge, those would be my only questions. It doesn't appear her testimony has changed from what...
Ms. Henry, my last question to you is anything, the discussion that you had outside of the courtroom related to the round table or the length of time, have any effect on the testimony that you've previously given in this case?
Not at all.
And that you intend to give when called in here as a witness?
Yes, not at all.
Thank you, Ms. Henry. Thank you. You may be excused. We're taking a lunch break, so the witnesses can also take lunch breaks. Please do not watch or listen to anything about this trial. Please do not discuss with anyone anything about this trial. But we're not going to come back and start calling witnesses until approximately 12:30. So I suspect you may be one of the next witnesses. All right. Who's the next one?
Jessica Gilbert.
All right. And before we bring in Ms. Gilbert, Ms. Folgera, I gave you some leeway on that one, but if their testimony is that they've had no exposure, this may be different. Someone may say that they've watched live stream. Then I'll allow you to get into those questions. But I'm not going to allow you to get into those questions if there's no indication that they've had any violation of the rule, because we don't just do that with witnesses who didn't violate the rule. I gave you some leeway because of the serious nature of this case, but I'm not going to allow it with the next two unless we get past that first hurdle of whether there was any violation of the rule.
And Judge, the only reason we did that was because we had a conversation real quickly with the assistant state attorneys, because she is from Virginia, and everyone here recognizes the amount of time and money that has gone into this case, and that we would have had to bring her all the way back from Virginia for next week sometime. So that's why we did this. So I apologize
Not a
for what I
problem.
told you.
No, it's all right.
And with that, are they withdrawing their motion to have her excluded?
Yes, Judge, based on her answers.
Yes.
All right. I don't know that they had made a motion. There was no basis to make a motion. There was some suspicion that they may have violated. No, I hear you. I said she's not going to testify. I apologize. She can testify. Let's bring in the next one.
Jessica Gilbert.
Jessica Gilbert. Ms. Gilbert, good morning and welcome. I apologize for bringing you in under these circumstances. Let me assure you first that nobody is alleging that you've done anything wrong or anything like that. However, we got some information that we need to discuss before we allow you to testify in front of the jury. The first thing that I need to do is swear you in. If you'll raise your right hand, please. Thank you. Do you swear any testimony you give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, you put your hand down. It's come to our attention that some of the witnesses in this case may have had discussions outside of the courtroom about their testimony, about their depositions, or any testimony that they intend to give in this case, is one issue. The other is that some of the witnesses may have, because there is a live stream of this case, may have been able to watch part of this trial before they testify, either opening statements or testimony of witnesses. So it's a two-part question. So my first one to you is, did you have any exposure to this trial outside of this courtroom before you walked in today?
No.
By that I mean, just so the record's clear and specifically, were you able to read any media reports of this trial or watch any live stream of this trial?
I did read an article on the case when it happened like 4 years ago.
Okay. That's not an issue. I'm not worried about that. Have you had any discussion either outside this courtroom or back at Florida State or on the way here since this trial started about your testimony in this case?
I have not.
Okay. Mr. Terry, do you have any questions?
I have no questions, Judge.
Ms. Bulgari, do you have any questions?
No questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. We're taking a lunch break, so we're not going to start calling witnesses again, but once we pick up at 12:30, I suspect you'll be brought in at that time. Thank you. And in the meantime, avoid any contact with the case and discussing it with anyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Christina Chiotti.
Chiotti?
Yes, sir.
All right. Ms. Chiotti, good morning and welcome. First of all, let me apologize for bringing you in under these circumstances. Please don't be nervous or think that you may have done anything wrong. We simply need to inquire about a couple of things before you testify.
Sure.
If you'll raise your right hand, please, I need to swear you in. Thank you. Do you swear any testimony you give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
All right, you put your hand down. Then we've had some information or reports that some of the witnesses in this case may have been exposed to reports of the case since the trial started. It's being apparently live streamed on a couple of news networks, and we want to just make sure that the witnesses have not had exposure, watched anything, opening statements, testimony of any other witnesses, or anything like that. So my first question to you is, have you watched any reports, either in the news or live stream? Because I say news, and now there's all these social media like Instagram and FaceTime and all that. So anything outside of this courtroom.
I have watched a video from the first day that they said they were taking a while to select the jury, but nothing of testimonies of any sort of that nature.
So was that a news report of the, not
Yes.
of what was happening in the courtroom?
Right, it was a news anchor talking.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Tell me, and then I do have to inquire about the details of what you may have been exposed to.
It was just saying that it was taking longer than expected to pick the jury, and that the trial was going to be taking place for the next 2 weeks.
Anything else? Any other details?
No.
And you've already, but I just want to make sure the record is clear, you have not watched anything that was being done in the courtroom, opening statements, testimony of witnesses. Is that a correct statement?
Right.
That report that you did hear about the jury being taking longer than expected to be selected, that's an issue I have with the attorneys. But did that in any way influence the testimony that you intend to give in this case?
No, there's nothing to do.
All right, so you, as far as you stand here before me, you don't expect your testimony that you've given in your deposition to change in any way?
No.
All right, Mr. Terry, any questions?
I have no questions, Judge.
You know what, I don't think I did the follow-up. I apologize. Did you have any discussions with anyone, any of the other witnesses, about your testimony in this case?
About my testimony, no.
Okay.
Judge, I have a question.
Yes.
Ms. Chiotti, did you share with anyone out in the lobby about the live stream, or that you had shared it with a friend or something about live stream in the trial?
I had sent the live stream link to my mother so that she could.
Watch you
Watch
testify
you.
today.
Yes.
Okay. So you are aware of the live stream, and the
I am.
discussion about the live stream, you were telling the two women that just walked out of here?
Yes, their parents wanted to watch as well.
Okay, so the live stream discussion was about your family getting to watch you guys testify?
Right.
And you have not watched any portions of the live stream at all?
No.
Okay. Were you all also discussing, you and the fellow witnesses, anything about when you gave your depositions or deposition testimony or anything like that?
Not specifically, no. It was that we said it was a while ago.
That you had given your depositions?
Right, and that that we established that we've all either attended school in Tallahassee or worked in Tallahassee.
So you did talk about giving depositions, but the content of what you testified
Right.
at during the depositions you did not discuss.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Please don't discuss the case amongst anyone else, and don't watch any of that live stream. Don't even contact your parents until after you testify.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much. We appreciate that. She's exited. Wow, that is not at all, what we had been led to believe. So, are there any motions to strike her testimony?
No, Judge, but again, I understand what you just said, but in fact, there were discussions about depositions. We don't know what it is, and it's only appropriate for us to bring this to everybody's attention. And frankly, again, at this point now, no, there's not a motion. No, now we do know that conversations were happening, and we're not going to have our employees eavesdropping on people's conversations out there. So I think the inquiry was appropriate, and at this point, I think you should instruct both sides to make sure that we've talked to our witnesses and that the rules have been invoked and what that means.
I don't disagree that the inquiry was not appropriate, but it turns out to have been a false alarm. I will advise each side to ensure now, whether they're here, whether they're out of this country or out of this state, the implications of the rule and their need to follow it. Because if anything comes up at this point forward, we are going to do the same thing, and it may result in their preclusion from testifying, including...
We have, Judge. I've looked through the list. Every single other person we have already advised this. These were the only ones because they were traveling and I was not in communication with them. I did not.
I hear you. That's the third time.
But everyone else that's left on this list already knows the rule.
I appreciate that, and I trust that. I told the jury 12:30. That gives you all a little longer than 30 minutes to get your lunch and my court personnel to take a break. We'll pick up at 12:30, calling witnesses. Have a nice lunch. Thank you all.